about the World Cup. It's all coming up. Don't go anywhere. It's all coming up right after the weather.
Evening, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update. After a fairly glum Monday, should be a bit brighter tomorrow. There'll be a bit more sunshine around, but it's not going to be a fine day. There'll be more heavy showers and gusty winds as well. Right now, this weather front is providing some intense downpours and very gusty winds as it swings in from the west. You may well get woken up overnight as that band of rain moves through. The gusts of wind suddenly whipping up. We do have Met Office yellow weather warnings in place. The rain will ease a little as it works its way eastwards, but as I say, there's still a chance you could get woken up through the night as that heavy rain and gusty winds swings through. Behind it, clearer skies allowing temperatures to dip to single figures, but still, it's a pretty mild night for the time of year. And then Tuesday will be a mix of sunshine and showers. As I said, a brighter day compared to today, but there will still be showers across all areas, and those showers will at times be heavy, perhaps even turn into thunderstorms, tending to move through, and parts of northern Scotland, eastern England, parts of the south may not see too many showers come the afternoon. It will still be fairly blustery, but it will again be pretty mild with temperatures mostly in the teens come the afternoon. Through Tuesday evening, again, just lots of showers zipping through on that fairly brisk wind. Dry 1 minute, you're caught in a downpour the next, and that's how we go into Wednesday. The winds are starting to shift a little by Wednesday, so the showers more coming in from the west. Parts of eastern England, northeast Scotland may not see too many. Actually, it should be a drier day in southern Scotland on Wednesday as well. But again, when we see the showers, they'll be heavy, dropping a lot of rain in a short space of time. Still fairly breezy, but still temperatures a couple of degrees above average for the time of year. The mild theme continues. The showers, though, should be easing, looking quite a lot drier for many of us through Thursday into the weekend, but it is still going to stay very warm.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales
and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hey, welcome along. It is COP27 all this week, and we're going to try really hard to pretend to take it seriously. Mark Morano, who's been on this show multiple times, will join us live from Egypt tomorrow.
We're heading to the United Nations Climate Summit, and this is the way we chose to go. See you there soon.
Well, I can't do the rest of it because it's all back referring to that. Here's the news with Polly. Take it away, Polly Middlehurst.
Thank you. Good evening, Mark. This is Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has said climate security goes hand in hand with energy security, adding the UK's tripling its funding to help nations adapt to the impacts of climate change. Rishi Sunak has been addressing world leaders at the COP27 summit after holding bilateral talks with French President Emmanuel Macron. The two sides have agreed to work on tackling illegal immigration and to collaborate further on the transition to clean energy, including on civil nuclear power.
Climate security goes hand in hand with energy security. Putin's abhorrent war in Ukraine and rising energy prices across the world are not a reason to go slow on climate change. They are a reason to act faster.
The COP27 summit has also been told the world's action on climate change is either a collective solidarity or collective suicide pact. The UN Secretary-General says countries need a clear, financed roadmap to prevent irreversible climate chaos. Antonio Guterres is calling for a universal early warning system within the next 5 years and for all governments to impose a windfall tax on fossil fuel companies. A £250 million plan to replace the national flagship, Royal Yacht Britannia, has been scrapped as part of cuts to government spending. Former Prime Minister Boris Johnson championed the scheme when he was in charge, but faced criticism from MPs who feel there are other priorities for military spending. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace told the Commons he's prioritising the procurement of multi-purpose surveillance vessel over the flagship. A service has been held to mark the opening of the Royal British Legion's Field of Remembrance. The field at the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire pays tribute to those who have lost their lives in conflict from World War I to the present day. It will be open to the public to pay their respects until the end of the month. The Prince of Wales has opened up about mental health. In a conversation with footballers Harry Kane and Declan Rice, Prince William said the game has taught him that disappointment is a part of life. The trio shared their fondest football memories during a podcast ahead of the World Cup, which begins in under a fortnight.
You know, handling some of those really disappointing England results in the past, that was hard. I found that really difficult because, again, the same euphoria that we had comes crashing down and whittles away, and that's quite hard to take because you feel all on a high, you feel all together, and then suddenly normal life just gets back on again, and it's like, well, where did that all go? Was that real? What happened, and how do I get that feeling back? And yet football has that ability to just put it all on a plate for you and then suddenly just take it all away.
TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Mark Steyn.
Are you broke enough yet? Sure, that electricity bill caught you by surprise, and that interest rate increase will clobber your mortgage payment, but to His Majesty's government, you still look pretty flush. So that nice Mr. Sunak's ministry has just indicated his support for $1 trillion climate reparations package. Oh, look at that. For the purposes of comparison, $1 trillion is roughly twice what Rishi Rich burned through in COVID furloughs. So the good news is, if we didn't actually have that original $500,000, committing an equally mythical trillion should be a breeze. If that word reparations rings a vague bell, kind of familiar, well, it's been a while, but 103 years ago, after the Great War, at the Versailles Conference, Britain and its allies imposed brutal, crippling reparations upon Germany. A century later, we're so advanced and enlightened that we now impose brutal, crippling reparations upon ourselves. That's progress. If you also have a dim and distant recollection of the brutal, crippling reparations leading to the rise of Hitler and thus the Second World War, don't worry, these new reparations aren't going to cause another world war. If they do, we won't be in it, because the British Army has taken the precaution of giving all its ammunition to Ukraine. So that's the good news from the COP27 climate Beano in Sharm el Shakedown. Oh, I'm sorry, the down in Shakedown is apparently silent. My Arabic's a little rusty. Meanwhile, back in the real world, do you remember just a year or two back when you used to go out on your front step every Thursday and clap for the NHS like a good performing seal? Have you seen the NHS lately? You're probably wondering if we protected the NHS so well that it's retired to the Bahamas. Well, no, it's still out there, apparently. Some county somewhere or other, maybe Rockall, is that where it is? Headline from the Telegraph. Patients wait 2.5 days for an ambulance as NHS crisis deepens. 2.5 days, you don't say. As you can see from the subhead, officialdom has begun blaming the excess deaths, 1,000 a week through the spring and summer, on the inability of sick persons to get an ambulance. Headline from the Daily Express, quote, Dad died during 11-hour ambulance wait as 999 call unanswered for 10 minutes. The Daily Mail says at least 64 Londoners have died waiting for an ambulance. That's bad. But the reason you're reading it in the papers is because it's marginally less embarrassing to officialdom than suggesting it might be something to do with the mumble, Pfizer, mumble, AstraZeneca. I don't want to say that out loud. Don't need another Ofcom complaint before Thursday. Long ambulance waits prompt demands from all points on the spectrum to make sure the NHS is, quote, funded properly, as opposed to blaming it on the vaccines, which would and should prompt calls for criminal prosecution and long jail sentences. By the way, as that Express headline makes plain, the 11-hour wait for the ambulance does not include your initial desperate plea to 999. From the Telegraph again. Some patients were left waiting as long as 52 minutes for an answer to a 999 call, the figures show. This delay occurred in the northeast, with waits of up to 20 minutes in Yorkshire. The reason we have emergency 3-digit numbers, as you'll know if you know your history of the telephonic numbering system, the reason they have 3-digit emergency numbers is because seconds count. So you haven't got time to dial 017135924768789377762. The 3-digit number is supposed to be answered immediately. That's why it's 3 digits. And then the ambulance reaches you within minutes. 7 minutes is the NHS target, though that's longer than many services would take unless you live on an outlying Shetland island. So when you're on hold for 52 minutes, that's a clue that you're not really in a first world country, are you? In fact, you're not even in a functioning third world country. In England alone, over 7 million people, that's 13% of the population of England and about the combined population of Scotland and Northern Ireland. So if the waiting list of the NHS was one of the home nations, it would be the second biggest one. 13% of people on the NHS waiting list. The United Kingdom is turning into a huge waiting list with an ever so teensy-weensy little sovereign state attached. Why does anyone at COP27 take Rishi Rich and his vast bloated UK delegation seriously? Are you going to take lessons on sea levels in the Maldives in the 22nd century from a guy who can't get an ambulance to you on the same business day and can't pick up a telephone within an hour? Rishi Rich is not technically responsible for sea levels in the Maldives or Tuvalu. The British Prime Minister was responsible for the Maldives until 1965 when they became independent, and for Tuvalu until 1978 when our Pacific friends did likewise. And we certainly wish both our Commonwealth cousins nothing but the best. But rising sea levels have nothing on the huge chasm opening up between our ruling class and the citizens they purport to govern. I am surprised the masses aren't revolting and taking to the streets to demand the overthrow of a decadent, uncaring government too busy dancing under the glitter ball at the COP27 inaugural banquet with comely young lovelies from Extinction Rebellion while envying Rishi doing the opening lambada with Greta Thunberg. But perhaps the revolting masses are worried that if they take to the streets, they might slip on a discarded COVID mask and be lying there for a day and a half waiting for an ambulance. The priority given to any public policy now is more or less in inverse proportion to the government's responsibility for it. However, the cost of striking attitudes can get pretty expensive. Here is a telling finding buried in the small print of a new Ipsos poll. Here's the salient fact. Do you support economic sanctions against Russia, even if they lead to higher energy bills for you? In March, 73% of respondents did. By October, that had fallen to 41%. That's the difference between being able to afford your virtue signalling and not. It's all fun on the games on the beach at Sharm el-Sheikh, but wait till your climate reparations check comes due. Toby Young is the founder of the Daily Skeptic website and of the Free Speech Union, and we are always glad to see him. Toby, how on earth, when you've got like 15-hour, 28-hour, 2.5-day waits for an ambulance, does this sick government think its priority should be COP27?
It is extraordinary. I mean, I thought when Rishi Sunak initially said he wasn't going to be going and downgraded Alok Sharma from a cabinet minister to a minister not in the cabinet. I mean, admittedly, he did reimpose the fracking ban, but on balance, it felt as though he was being a bit more realistic and wasn't going to be diverted by the climate emergency agenda. But then it's all gone pear-shaped. He's now gone to COP27. He's praised Prince Charles, whereas Liz Truss tried to prevent Prince Charles from going. Seemingly the British delegation is taking seriously this demand for reparations because Britain was the first country to industrialise. I mean, It's completely absurd. I mean, first of all, they talk about reparations to countries like Pakistan, which suffered flooding, very bad flooding earlier this year. But the evidence that that flooding was caused by climate change is threadbare at best. We looked at this. I mean, first of all, the notion that a third of the country was submerged because of flooding is complete nonsense. We looked at the data on the Daily Skeptic. It was 8%. And the idea that it was the worst flooding Pakistan has ever experienced because of the climate emergency was also wrong. There have been 4 other occasions in the last century in which more people have died as a result of flooding in Pakistan than in 2022. But even if Britain was, in some weird, elaborate way, responsible for the flooding in Pakistan this year, and therefore, I mean, that's not a reason we should pay them compensation. I mean, the number of people in poverty in Pakistan has fallen from something like 65% of the population in 2001 to 25% today. Why? Because of the pioneering industrial capitalism that Britain came up with in the middle of the 18th century. The notion that industrial capitalism, that engine of progress has caused more harm than good, and therefore we ought to compensate these countries that are supposedly suffering the effects of climate change thanks to us. I mean, the UN estimates that roughly in the last 50 years, more people have been removed from poverty across the world than in the previous 500. Why? Because that economic model pioneered by us in the middle of the 18th century has been rolled out across the world. They should be thanking us, not asking us for compensation.
Well, but aren't you saying, therefore, that on the logic of this cockamamie conference, that because Britain invented the spinning jenny ahead of anybody else, we're going to be stuck with the lion's share of the bill for this climate reparations?
Well, that's the argument, but what they're not taking into account is the extraordinary benefits of embracing the economic model pioneered in this country. I mean, you know, life was nasty, brutish and short prior to industrialization. Human beings made virtually no progress at all. I mean, I think the GDP per capita in Pakistan in 1960, pre-industrialization, was something like 0.
Yeah, but that's your fault too, Toby Young, because what's now Pakistan was under your rule until 1948. You did that to
under
Pakistan.
the heel. Without wanting to get into a debate about the pros and cons of colonialism, I think that, you know, the idea that we somehow owe the world compensation because they've followed the economic model that we came up with, and because we've been producing carbon emissions longer than anyone else. I mean, Boris, when he was asked about this, I mean, at least had the decency to say the British taxpayer cannot afford to compensate the world for the price it's paying for industrialisation. But he should have gone on to say, but actually they benefited far more than they've suffered.
That's not really an answer, is it? Rishi Sunak seems to have signed on to this precisely because we're broke. Rishi Sunak has spent all the money this country will be making till the end of the century in the last 3 years. And so who cares if we come up with an equally fantastical amount to give reparations to all the countries we've wrecked?
That isn't actually the argument he's making. I mean, I think the difficulty with even giving these demands for reparations the time of day, as his delegation appears to be doing, is, you know, in a couple of weeks' time, the autumn statement is going to be published. And in the autumn statement, they're going to somehow fill this 60 billion black hole in Britain's finances by cutting public expenditure by 35 billion and increasing taxes by 25 billion. How can they ask British people to tighten their belts when they're talking about paying reparations not just to the people of Pakistan, but to China? Right. They're talking about paying reparations to China, which is an absolute economic giant compared to the declining UK.
I know.
We're in recession.
Well, let me ask you the thought I concluded with. I don't think under Ofcom regulations I'm allowed to foment violent revolution on UK telly. I haven't checked, but it seems likely to be in there somewhere. But why aren't people madder about all this?
Well, maybe it hasn't quite sunk in yet. I mean, it's quite difficult, I think, for people to realise that what a complete scam the whole climate emergency agenda is, because, you know, it's being pumped. The propaganda behind it is being pumped out 24/7 by the mainstream media. I mean, Sky issued a report last year, I think it was, saying that it wanted to include subliminal promotion of the net zero agenda in its programming. And not only did it brag about trying to unconsciously get people to sign up to this agenda, it criticised other broadcasters for not including subliminal messages in their own programmes to get people to sign up to it.
Yeah, people won't take this seriously until there's a plot development in Coronation Street where it's entirely washed away by floods caused by climate change. That's what we...
That'll happen.
That's
coming up next season.
That's the thing is, whenever you make a cheap joke, to do it for real, because that's the fastest way to make 10 million quid. So if any Coronation Street scriptwriters are watching tonight, that'll make your name, that'll make your fortune. Thank you, Toby. Let me know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Everybody takes the COP27 seriously, even those institutions which are supposed to be immune to modish fancies. Tweet from the Archbishop of Canterbury. Look at this. Where's his tweet? Here we go. The climate emergency is an existential global threat that requires a global response with radical action, imagination, and justice. In fairness to His Grace, unlike most of the movie stars and the corporate grandees at COP27, he practices what he preaches. Under his inspirational leadership, the Church of England is reducing its carbon footprint to barely detectable levels. Lois Perry from car26.org is back with us, and we're always glad to see her. Do you think the people are going to put up with climate reparations?
Oh, do you know what? I think this is a massive distraction. I think there might be an unholy trinity. You know that I think that there's only actually one government now. There's no opposition and there's no government.
That's another Ofcom complaint.
Oh, sorry about that.
Have that one on me. If that guy from the Radio 3 is watching, Matthew Sweet, that's our bonus for you tonight.
There you go. So I'm of the opinion that the whole thing's been set up. This is my opinion. And I think we've got a bit of good cop, bad cop 27 going on here. We've got Boris Johnson saying, oh, well, you know, let's do the reparations. We've got Rishi not saying anything. We've got Ed Miliband coming up with this nonsense in the first place. Anyone would think it was a bit of a distraction, you know, from what's actually going on over there, which is a massive annihilation of everything that we've ever thought, you know, was normal life. But
yeah, I mean, I think that's actually a very good point, is that when everybody, I mean, I made the mistake of tuning into the BBC a couple of hours ago. And they had their 37 climate correspondents. I mean, just their carbon footprint in covering the COP27 is phenomenal. But I was looking at it and I was thinking, yeah, that your point is quite good, that the reason all this stuff is suddenly in the news all day long is because they don't want us talking about the stuff that isn't in the news.
Well, no, then they can drop the reparations thing. Rishi looks like he's being a good Tory because he listened to Boris. He's obviously the de facto sort of shadow prime minister or whatever at COP27, which is very, very weird in itself. And we think, oh, that's OK, then just annihilate our economy. Let's push forward the whole concept of anti-capitalism. Let's have no life. Let's all freeze in our homes, but at least we're not paying the reparations. They must think we're thick.
Well, they do in a way, don't they? Because for, 2 or 3 years now, we've put up with things that no British subject in the primitive world of, say, 1873 would have entertained for a second, like being told that you can't sit more than 15 minutes on a park bench. I mean, they have learned, they think we've been taught to obey.
We have been taught to obey, but it's quite interesting what you were saying about the peasants need to revolt rather than the peasants are revolting, which means something completely different entirely. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. People do need to wake up and see what's happening. But I have people contacting me constantly and say, OK, but what do we do? You know, what is it that we actually do? You know, I talked to you before about net exit, which is the thing that I'm pushing at the moment. And we're going to be hearing a lot more about this. So pushing for a referendum. They did it on Brexit. We got David Cameron to start behaving himself and give us a referendum. And Nigel got that through. So maybe there is some scope there. But Greta Thunberg has totally showed her hand now. She said we've got to get rid of this capitalist and racist West. She's not even pretending it's about the planet anymore. And when you've got King Charles, who's supposed to be completely out of politics, who's making £8 billion a year from offshore wind farms.
Are you kidding me? How much is he making?
It will be £8 billion. And actually, the revenue's a lot higher than that. It's 32 billion, but he gets 25%. Now, I don't mind that. That's fine. But you've got to declare an interest, especially if you've made a decision to not stay out of politics, but to be getting actively involved, hosting dinners for Stella McCartney and Rishi Sunak. I mean, how's that staying out of politics? It's disgraceful.
Yeah, actually, that is a. Do you think this is what people want in their king?
No, I don't. And I think that's why there was absolute dismay when the Queen died, because it wasn't just about her. Everyone loved her. I loved her. It was about the end of an era of impartiality and of certain views and of certain traditional values. And that funeral, I was crying. I was crying for her, but I was also crying for the death of what I consider to be Britain. I hope I'm not true. I hope I'm not right. I hope it's not true.
Well, let me just ask Toby Young about that, Toby. I mean, it is extraordinary that it's not just this whole thing. We listened to the UN Secretary General telling us we're all in the express elevator down to climate hell. Now you saw the Church of England tweet we posted. This is a church that has no faith in itself, but is gung-ho for this new alternative religion. Now we have the king, who represents a 1,000-year-old monarchy, and he's a global king, so he's my king in Canada, and if you're in Tuvalu, assuming it hasn't been washed over during the course of the show, he's your king. He's your king too. And yet, all these great institutions. Why is it? Why are they all into this?
Yeah, well, the same question comes up with why has the Church of England completely embraced the woke agenda? Why has it commissioned this review to try and decolonise church buildings and monuments and so forth? And I think the explanation is that the Church of England is probably, with some justification, worried about falling attendances. They're seeing the empty pews every week in their church. They think, how can we make ourselves relevant? How can we somehow persuade people that we are still the conscience of this country? And they see issues like climate change as public, that's an expression of the public's moral concerns.
Actually, I think it's much deeper and more sinister than that. I think that all of our institutions have been infiltrated, including the Church of England. And actually, the Church of England becoming less traditional, I think, alienates people from going to church.
Well, there's a point to that, isn't there? I mean, why would you say, oh, I've just spent the first 6 days of the week listening to all these guys from Sharm el-Sheikh telling me we're all going to burn in hell because of the climate. So for Sunday, I fancy a change, and I'd like to be told we're all going to burn in hell because I'm a godless sinner living a depraved life. And instead you go along on the 7th day and you're told all the same BBC drivel you've been hearing for the previous 6 days.
Yeah, well, I think they're just completely misguided about that. We had a case at the Free Speech Union, a trainee vicar in the Church of England who, when his wife gave birth to a child, on Twitter kind of celebrated and quoted a biblical verse about going forth and multiplying, the Psalm, and he had a pile-on. He was piled on Twitter. How could you be so irresponsible? Don't you realise that having children's bad for the environment? And what about all those people that can't have children? Haven't you given a thought to them? And all the people piling on were in fact Church of England female vicars, and the response of his archdeacon, instead of telling them to take a hike, was, I think you better go and have some psychotherapy. So if you express traditional Orthodox Christian beliefs in the Church of England, they think you're mad.
It's a misprint in the Bible. Go forth and don't multiply. Thank you, Lois. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, it's terrible. You can't, I don't know, whoever they sent it to, Prontoprint or whatever it's called. Anyway, next we're going to get to your thoughts. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Plus, do you feel recent World Cups haven't been quite homophobic enough for your tastes? Prefer your stadiums built with slave labour? Peter Tatchell says you're going to love this month's big kickoff. And David Starkey's here on the history our children are not learning. Don't touch that dial. You never know what horrors are lurking on some of these other channels. We're coming right back.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for The Briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
GB News is the People's Channel, so let's channel what the people are saying. We asked you how you felt about climate reparations, which Mr. Sunak appears to have signed on to. A Twitter user says, I don't know why we can't use his Twitter handle, if one cares about humans and what humanity can achieve, then one is thankful for the Industrial Revolution and for the use of hydrocarbons, so no reparations. Yeah, it's interesting, under this scheme we're going to be paying climate reparations to China, which will use the money to build more plants to pump all kinds of toxins into the Yangtze River, which is a colour right now that no river has ever been before. Stephen says the political class really knows how to throw taxpayers' money away. Leslie says we'll pay climate reparations after they pay reparations to the families of the grooming gang victims. Yeah, there is a lot of people. There are a lot of citizens of the United Kingdom who could use some reparations if we're going to make that the model. And those poor girls who were, like our friend Samantha Smith, who were abused sexually for a decade on end, while the police and social services and the council all turned down her pleas. Do you know Anna Breeze? She's ex-ITN, ex-BBC, and now some sort of self-appointed media ethics arbiter. Here she is on Twitter today saying, quote, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but I'm glad I refused to go on GB News with Mark Steyn. Oh my, that's telling me. Although now I think about it, it's not what she actually told me at the time. Quote, I've just come back from holiday, so I'm shattered. I would be willing to come on another time. And then she sent a follow-up text to make sure we had her mobile number so we could get hold of her anytime. I'm not going to obviously read out the mobile number. I said at the time that I didn't think we'd be needing to put that number on speed dial. I'm not really into pompous media ethics bores posing as Little Miss Principles at the best of times, but I've no idea why she feels the need to keep lying about her response to this show's only invitation to her. Nevertheless, I'm happy to hear from all points of view, because the shriveled, constricted bounds of UK public discourse have not done this country any favours. All we're doing is trying to widen it a little. Peter Tatchell, my next guest, has been a most influential man in the affairs of the British. Oh, there he is, trying to perform a citizen's arrest on Robert Mugabe. That's something any man should be proud of. Most of what he says these days sounds like conventional wisdom, but it wasn't. when he arrived in London from Melbourne all those years ago, and he helped make it conventional. I disagree with him on all manner of things, but if you're a betting man, put your money on Peter, because things are far more likely to go his way than mine. In the UK, that is. Abroad, it's tougher sledding. Peter's just back from Qatar, where he organised that country's first LGBT demo. That's consistent with what Peter Tatchell has believed all his life. Other people, one notices, are not quite so consistent. The same people who would boot you off the BBC if you express, say, a mild antipathy to same-sex marriage, are happy to dispatch their top sporting correspondents to Qatar as if it's perfectly normal for the world's best football to be played in a country where homosexuality is punishable by up to 3 years in jail, or if you're Muslim, execution. Gee, it's almost as if no one cares about the homophobia as long as you write a big enough check. Qatar isn't a footballing nation. There's no Wembley Stadium, so they've had to build them from scratch using foreign slave labour. But like I said, their check's clear, so the world looks away. Qatar putting the Q into LGBTQ, Peter. Are you looking forward to the World Cup after your time over there?
Well, I think the World Cup should have never been given to Qatar, given its appalling human rights record. When FIFA granted Qatar the World Cup, they said it would be an agent for change, that this would be a motor for progress. But in the 12 years since, there's not been a single reform on women's rights or LGBT+ rights. There have been some improvements for migrant workers, but still migrant workers today complain of unpaid wages, of often being forced to live in overcrowded slum hostels, and being denied permission to change jobs to escape abusive employers.
Right.
So not much change there.
Well, and on top of that, at least according to the fellas at The Guardian, thousands of them have died in the course of building this stadium.
About 6,500, and many of the families of the deceased workers are still to this day awaiting compensation.
It doesn't seem to matter to FIFA, though. It's just like, as I said, this isn't a footballing country. It's not like Cameroon or whatever. It's just somebody that's bought its way into the big leagues because it's flush for entirely different reasons.
Absolutely. It's money talks. I mean, there are allegations that the decision to grant Qatar the World Cup was corruptly achieved through bribes.
Right.
I can't prove that, but there's some considerable evidence, and some people certainly believe it. Right now, of course, FIFA is bending over backwards to be nice to Qatar and to try and bat away any criticism. In fact, it's just recently said, let's focus on the football, not human rights.
Well, the pushback against you is very interesting to me, because they said, and again, you know, one has a decent respect for the opinions of mankind. It's no surprise to anybody that Islam isn't cool with homosexuality. That's true in...
Or women.
Or women, yeah, no, and that's also equally true. But I noticed the arguments being made against, yes, the Qatar criminal code says if you're Muslim, they're going to cut your head off for homosexuality. But actually, they haven't done that. There's no record of anyone being executed for it. So how do you respond to something like that?
Well, how would any of us feel living in a regime where that was on the statute books, where potentially you could be executed for loving a person of the same sex? And we wouldn't find that acceptable. And it does strike a sort of culture of fear and anxiety in Muslim Qataris. They never know for certain just how safe they will be. And of course, leaving aside the threat of execution, there is still the threat of imprisonment. 3 years for consenting adult same-sex behaviour, up to 7 years if it's deemed to be an honour crime. And of course, Qatar also has secret gay conversion centres where LGBT+ people can be detained against their will and subjected to abusive attempts to turn them straight. I know one young gay man who was put in one of these centres. He described it as a form of religious and psychological brainwashing. He was so traumatized by the experience that sometime later he killed himself. That's just how bad it is in Qatar.
Well, you know, if instead of opening it in Qatar, they'd opened it in Cleethorpes or Carrickfergus, everybody here would be up in arms. But somehow it doesn't count when it's the World Cup halfway around the planet.
You see, regardless of where the World Cup is held, sport is supposed to be an equal playing field based on merit without discrimination. And in fact, FIFA says in its own rules and recent statements, discrimination during the World Cup will not be tolerated. There's a zero toleration of discrimination. Yet there are 7 countries, including Qatar, which currently have a total criminalisation of same-sex relations, with, in many cases, several years or more imprisonment, and in some cases, even potential death penalty. Well, now just think, if a star footballer from any of those 7 countries, including Qatar, came out as gay or was known to be gay, they would be more likely to be arrested and jailed than selected for their national team to play in the World Cup. And that's discrimination. It's against FIFA's rules, but FIFA is looking the other way.
Well, just on that, just to go back to your citizen's arrest on Robert Mugabe, when there's an African country that does this, kind of like the Uganda, which became very fiercely homophobic, and I think the guy, the way he put it, said, "Why can't we go back to the old days when these types were speared by their relatives?" Everyone's happy to beat up on those countries because they're inconsequential in the world. They're poor. They're basket cases. A lot of these Muslim countries have the money to silence the criticism.
Well, that is certainly the case. And you've probably just heard the recent reports that Qatar is buying the loyalty and support of football fans. It's offering them free flights, free tickets, free accommodation, and £60 a day in spending money, and in return they are required to sing the praises of Qatar, to wave flags and sing songs on command, and to use their social media to rebut Qatar's critics. I mean, this is an abuse of power. And, you know, to use money to buy loyalty in that way, it shows how desperate the regime is and how they know they are in a very bad state in terms of public opinion.
Just remember what Peter was saying. They'll pay you to go to this thing and give you 60 quid a day spending money. So, like, any gay activist watching, you should book your seats there, open a gay pop-up bar in Qatar because, well, you know, it's like trying to look for a decent gay bar in Riyadh or Jalalabad. It's pretty fruitless, but if you all take the Qatar government up on their offer, you could make it the gayest World Cup yet. Thank you very much, Peter Tatchell. Stump the Steyn looms, ask me anything. gbviews@gbnews.uk, plus 2 words, David Starkey. David Starkey, stand well back. He's coming right up.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week. I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, are communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland, Wales,
And Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio.
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Two contrasting takes on history class in our schools from the Times. Schools urged to teach less British history. On the other hand, according to the Daily Express, hardly any of our children are getting any real history at all. Quote, British children failed on history learning, says new research. Many years ago, the Australian Prime Minister, John Howard, said to me that he wanted to teach history to Aussie school children as, quote, an heroic national narrative. Of course, there were always blemishes. You'll recall Cromwell's injunction to his portrait painter to paint him warts and all. But these days with British history, we paint just the warts, and that has consequences. For example, just 1 in 5 of those aged 18 to 24 have a positive view of Winston Churchill. A decade or so back, when the cancel culture got going, I modified Andy Warhol's line that in the future, everyone would be famous for 15 minutes to, in the future, everyone will be Hitler for 15 minutes. But reality has effortlessly outpaced me. To the nation's youth, Churchill is literally Hitler. Congratulations to our educators. David Starkey is back with us. Do you sometimes feel that the profession of historian is in fact threatened by this contemptuous attitude to the past? If the past is all wicked, why do we need guys like you?
I think the trouble is the profession of history, like most professions, is committing suicide. I think that's the position that we really need to be taking about. These kind of things actually begin within the academy. They don't come from outside the academy, they actually start within the academy. The problem is of course, that we use things like cancel culture. What we've got to understand is that there are two different ways of looking at the world. One is there is right and wrong, these absolute principles. You know, racism is wicked. Anybody who's guilty of racism, like D. Starkey or H. Hitler or W.S. Churchill, blah, end of you. There is another view which it says the world is a very complicated place. To judge it, you need to look at detailed evidence of behaviour, of action, of pressure, of circumstance, of value. And you arrive at judgments which weigh all of those things against each other and build into an overall pattern. Our problem is that the cancel culture, liberalism, it's that overall. It's essentially French. It's Descartes. It's the notion that you have a series of absolute principles or values. I was lucky as a boy. My mother taught me the problem with that approach. My mother's favourite word was principle. And I learned at the age of 7 what a principle was. Let me give you a definition of a principle. Mark, it is something that you feel so strongly about that you won't listen to reason on the subject. That's a principle. And we've now completely altered our method of judgment, of politics, of historical figures, of art, into deduction from, is this right? Does it promote equality? Does it promote freedom? Does it promote race relations? Rather than the proper way, which is the English, the scientific, the British way, which is inductive, looking at evidence. And there's an incredible paradox. The great revolution in the teaching of history in schools was to try to introduce children to the idea of evidence, to looking at facts and constructing argument from it. But of course, it never worked because the children couldn't understand it. So they're just indoctrinated.
But wouldn't, today they would say, oh, well, our feelings are more important than being able to look at evidence. But aren't they actually losing a lot of that too? I mean, obviously you don't have any sense of empathy. If you can't grasp, say, that until the 1950s, one continent, Europe, entirely owned another continent, Africa. And
rephrase. The essentially the Anglo-American world owned the world.
Yeah, but so it's not a choice of it's not the British Empire versus some utopia. It's the choice of whether you would prefer to be colonized by the British, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, even the Belgians. That's the choice. And if you can't even understand that, then the entirety of human history.
And that on the whole, it was rather better to be colonized by the British than by anybody else, because uniquely, of course. But again, you see, empire, bad. It's this simple ticking exercise, good, bad. Empire, of course, is highly complex. Similarly is industrialization, something else we're debating. What we've got to understand is that Britain effectively invents modernity. The empire is the beginning of globalization. Our industrial revolution is the beginning of this extraordinary world that we're in now. Right, the industrial revolution produces pollution. Yes, of course, terrible. We should start paying reparations. It's also the reason that people live longer, live better, live disease-free. But all you will get is somebody who really should know better, like David Attenborough, prattling about how wicked industrialization is. What we've got to do, we have to go back and to try to get people to understand that there has to be balance. There has to be argument from every... Because, it applies to our actual politics. What's gone wrong with our politics is exactly the same thing.
Well, no, I mentioned to Peter Tatchell, who's an awfully pleasant fellow, but in Australia, for example, he wants all these towns and states, like his hometown, Melbourne, and the state, Victoria, to give up those names and be replaced by Aboriginal names. And somehow to enter into debate on that sort of seems to miss the point.
It's deranged. It's simply deranged.
We won, they lost. That may be embarrassing to you, but it's a fact of life, and we should all
And also,
accept
do you know what? What we should be saying is, OK, very tough that a Stone Age people suffered. What Australia has created, what the British Empire created to Australia, is one of the most interesting, productive, economically, culturally, everything else, creative societies in the world. And again, the legacy of colonization in America, because what we really must remind ourselves is the biggest example of the suppression of a native people is not Australia. It is the United States of America, which is effectively complete wipeout. Nevertheless, This has always happened. The reason, for example, that in most colonial empires, if we're looking at South America, if we're looking in India, the reason those empires, in other words, why Spain is 102 Spaniards able to conquer the Aztecs and the Incas. Similarly,
and not because they were peace-loving ninnies; they were actually very violent societies.
As we know, the Aztecs practiced human sacrifice, the ripping out of hearts from live bodies. It's a violent militarist, but their empires, the Aztecs were an empire, the Incas were an empire. So when you decapitate the empire, 100 people with guns, dealing with people who don't have guns, you know, the famous Kipling line, we have the Gatling gun and they do not. Similarly, India, the reason the British, a tiny number of British troops, again, in competition with the French, take India, is because you were dealing with the crumbling Mughal empire. So again, the idea is that empires are uniquely Western and uniquely wicked. But we've got to see that the empire, Britain, is the essential vehicle of modernity. If you want your Apple computer, if you want your game things, if you want to live disease-free, if you want to have children who will, most of whom will not die in infancy, I'm afraid you need industrialization. You need emissions, you need nastiness.
And that's what actually the British Empire brought to a lot of those places.
Everywhere.
Thank you very much, Dave. I'm basically a 19th century imperialist, 100 years past my sell-by date. I didn't bring it up with Peter Tatchell because I thought it would cause unpleasantness, but I'm coming out, as he would say.
Join the club. Join the club.
No, I'm not joining. I'm joining the imperialist club. You're getting too excited now, David. That's going to do it.
There's water to cool you down.
Dan Wooden's here to macerate your Monday. What do you got for us, Dan?
Steyn, I hope you don't get that Ofcom complaint so early in the week, but you know what, you're probably doing something right if it does come in. Look, Alexander Downer is here. He's going to be fascinating, actually, because, of course, former Australian Foreign Minister, Australia managed to stop the boat. He has a prescription that he thinks Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman need to follow in order to do so. So Alexander Downer is going to lay out that plan live on the show tonight.
Say hi to him from me. I once went drinking with Mr. Downer, and he is a hard guy. He's serious. He's a hard guy to keep up with. I bet most of our wimpy Tory cabinet ministers couldn't manage that prodigious intake. Alexander Downer and more coming up after the weather with Dan. Stay safe, stay free.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. Tonight, Brits are kind-hearted and welcoming, but we've had enough of forking out £2 billion for illegal migrants